Okay. So I just want to be on the same page, right?
Yeah.
When we start, we'll do the roles, right? Offertory fee release. Hopefully we'll do the
Yeah.
They're weird ones, but the audience knows this one. So just play what's there, and I'll make sure I sing loudly.
That'll help out.
Okay?
Is that the start now?
No, that's the big one. I should let you know.
Okay, I'll wait for it. How you doing? You good last week? You dinner?
Oh, yeah. It was chilly.
Yeah.
We went out for Thai food, but then we walked, we had to go back. All the restaurants. And then we walked down the street and got ice cream and food.
Ice cream's good all year round.
It's, I was on our 42nd. And we both remember.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And I not very long. I think it was more about 8 years.
Wow. All right. That's doing all right. Oh, yeah. Have I seen him before?
Sure. Oh, there's a chubby one.
I got him now.
Good morning. I'm Joel Miller. I'm the interim minister here at the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So delighted to welcome you all this morning. With a little bit of rain and I'm more present now, aren't I? So pleased to welcome you here on a beautiful and rainy morning. We have so many things that are going on in the life of the congregation. Today is we're about to hear about the kickoff of our annual support drive. And part of what we're going to celebrate today is that drive with a special coffee hour. You'll hear more about that in just a moment. And some events that are coming up include a drag story hour on Saturday, May 6th at 11 a.m. And you could make it a fellowship kind of day, because then at 2 p.m., the Fun Committee is hosting a comedy show featuring Drew Hayes, Christine Frederick, Rita Morris, and David Landau. And all are welcome, admissions free to the comedy show. If you are a member, you should have gotten an email from us. We're asking for your preferences for nominees for the Ministerial Search Committee. And I think we're about halfway with a number of responses. So if you are, give that some attention this weekend, and do let us know. The preferences are secret, confidential. That's how the ballots are intended to be. If you would like to cast a ballot and computers aren't your thing, we do have paper ballots available, so you can give us your preferences. And now a special announcement from Candace Donaldson.
Good morning. It's a quiet bunch this morning. Good morning. Good morning. Okay. All right, that's a little bit better. I'm just going to pretend the room is full today, right? I know we have a few people away today, so. Have any of you noticed that the cherry blossoms are blooming, the tulips are popping, and birds are beginning to nest in your spaces? Guess what? That is a sure sign that it is time for this year's annual support drive. This year's budget has been specially curated to meet our current needs and strive for some other exciting opportunities. Some of these include an expanded OWL program with trained facilitators, staff salary increases that move towards the new UUA salary guidelines, and we would like to be able to hire another staff member part-time, and we are looking at also having possibly an intern minister next year. So we also need funds to continue building repair and maintenance, and have something set aside for those surprise maintenance issues. Right? We're also looking for promotion and growth of our beloved community. So, to meet all these goals, we are asking everyone to consider a 10% increase to their annual pledge. Now, if you are not able to pledge, and we understand there are circumstances where that is the case, what we need you to do is reach out to Reverend Joel to obtain a pledge waiver. Okay? Now, to incite everyone to get their pledges in promptly, and so that I can have time to spend with my wife and less time calling all the folks, right? We're offering 2 raffles this year. So, if you get your pledge in today, and you will get your letters and pledge cards after service, or you can go into Realm and pledge. For those of you who are online and not receiving your card today, they will come in the mail. But if you get your pledge in today, you will be entered into a raffle for $250 worth of gift cards to local businesses. Okay? Now, if you don't get it in today, you're not completely out of luck. If you get it in by Sunday, May 7th, you will be entered into a raffle for a $150 gift card to local businesses. So the sooner you get it in, the better, right? So thank you all for coming today to the launch of our annual support drive. After service, there will be special treats and coffee, of course, in the terrace room. So we invite you to join us, to enjoy, and to get your pledges in. If you need help with your pledges, you can certainly reach out to me at stewardship@muuf.org, or you can look my phone number up in Realm, or come and see me after service. Katie Julik, our accountant and everything, will be here today as well, and she can also help you get your pledges entered if that's something you would like. The last thing I will say is we are asking that as much as possible, if you can link your checking account into Realm instead of using a credit card. We appreciate that, and your money then goes further because, as you know, credit card fees are high. So again, if you need help with that, we are happy to do that. Right. Thank you so much.
I was talking with a member of the congregation last week. I live alone. I have a girlfriend who I'm very much in love with, but she lives on the other side of New York City, and I have my own apartment in Madison, not too far from here. And I've lived on my own for a while. And one of the things about living alone is that it's really hard to, well, meals are difficult. I go to the grocery store, everything's packaged for, it seems like 2 or 3 people. And I always feel like I have to buy too much food, or I can't buy enough food. It's just hard to get the right amount. And dishes, I don't like doing dishes in the first place, but I'll use some dishes, I put them in the dishwasher, but then they sit there so long because I don't use the dishes fast enough, and I didn't want to run. I was complaining to a member of the congregation about this. I don't want to run a half-empty dish load, so I end up washing them by hand. Except last Sunday, I got the most exquisite good news. It's more environmentally sound to run that dishwasher half full than it is to wash the dishes by hand. Yes! And that's why I come to church, let me tell you, or I come to fellowship. I come to fellowship because if I can learn something like that, where I can be more environmentally in sync with the world and use the dishwasher, even if it's not full, boy, thank you, fellowship. Good reason to be in community. We light our chalices now, our children's chalice, and the chalice we use here in worship. I invite you to join me in this morning's affirmation. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. I didn't quite get the order of things right before I left for a trip, for some vacation this past week. I'd like to sing next, to sing together number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth. I invite you to stand in body or in spirit.
For the splendor
I'd like to invite children or youth or adults, young at heart, who would like to come up and help me with the time for all ages this morning. Here comes some folks. Good morning. So glad to see you this morning. Hi. Good morning. So yesterday was Earth Day, and the first Earth Day was in 1970, and I remember celebrating the first Earth Day because we celebrated at the Unitarian Universalist congregation where I was growing up when I was 10 years old. And I loved the idea of Earth Day. At first I didn't understand it, but it made sense to me somehow that we would celebrate the other beings of the earth and find ways to live in harmony and care with all of the being, all of the life on this earth. It was many years later, though, that I discovered that Unitarian Universalists were an important part of the start of Earth Day. First, there was a scientist, a woman named Rachel Carson, who was a Unitarian Universalist, and she was very concerned about some chemicals that were being used. The farmers and other folks were trying to keep the number of mosquitoes much, much lower because mosquitoes could sometimes transmit diseases and things like that. In fact, in the neighborhood where I grew up, there used to be a truck that would go down the street once a month or so, and it would spray these chemicals all over the neighborhood. Big fog of it would go over in my house. It would come in my bedroom window. It was kind of gross. And then Rachel Carson realized, as a scientist, that these chemicals were hurting birds, that the chemicals would make the shells of the birds' eggs so thin that the baby birds couldn't get born. No one would publish her book, so she published it herself. And then all of a sudden, newspapers and magazines started printing parts of her book. There were some people that read it and said, "What? Really? That's why I'm not seeing any eagles anymore? That's why I don't see any ospreys anymore?" All of a sudden, her book became very popular. And in those days, selling 25 million books, 25 million copies of a book that was a lot of science with 50 pages of footnotes. If you don't know what that is, it's just lots of evidence of where she got her scientific ideas. Wow, 25 million. And it wasn't too much longer after that there was a terrible oil spill in California, and a Unitarian Universalist, who was also a senator, a United States senator, went and saw this oil spill and said, this is enough, we've got to do something about this. His name was Gaylord Nelson, and Senator Nelson said, let's have an Earth Day. Let's all learn about how to take care of the Earth. And so that's what happened in 1970. I've been celebrating Earth Day ever since that time in 1970. Now, it isn't like Unitarian Universalists were the people who started Earth Day. There were many people who were part of that. But Earth Day is filled with the ideas and the hopes and dreams of Unitarian Universalism, at least, if not many other hopes and dreams. So I wanted to share those two stories, the one about Rachel Carson, the scientist, and Gaylord Nelson, the senator, with you this morning. And remember how important Earth Day is, and how important it will be for you to have a healthy, flourishing earth as you grow up. Perhaps have your own children and your own congregations and friends. We're going to sing you to classes now. Would you like to take the chalice with you? Use both hands. There you go. All right. Go now in peace. Oh, we're singing Spirit of Life. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. We bring ourselves together in celebration of life, in aspirations for our lives and the lives of the people in the communities around us, hopes and dreams for the lives of our children, whether they're the children of our homes or the children of our spiritual homes. Hopes and dreams for our neighbors and their well-being. And those neighbors, whether they be human, birds, animals, insects. And it is this spiritual practice, milestones and passages, in which we practice paying attention to the ways in which we're connected, and the ways in which our lives are affected by the world and by each other. One milestone for Betsy and Stephen Burr this past week is learning that they will need to move from their apartment that is beloved to them. Betsy will be moving into nursing care after she finishes up in rehab, and Stephen will be moving into assisted living in the same building, but alas, they won't be together in their apartment anymore. And their joy is that they have this community who they know loves them and will reach out to them. There are many other milestones, joys, sorrows, experiences that are here simply because we have come, whether online or in person or with children back in the library. It matters that we share. It matters that we remember how deeply we're connected and how our lives intertwine and affect each other. I invite you into the spirit of meditation, or prayer, or contemplation, as is best in service for your spirit. Spirit of life, present like a friend. Always with me. I think always with us. But the word friend, is it adequate? Is it enough? It seems to fail to describe what it is. To be connected. To know your presence. I speak words and they are inadequate, but I speak them anyway. We share from the depths of our souls. Sometimes we have to use words to express how our lives are or are not. Our losses, our successes, our hopes, our fears. And it's frustrating sometimes. It's hard to know if you've answered when we ask, when we reach out. And then I remember, here I am, standing in this room, seeing the faces of these friends, hearing the cry of a small child, a smile on the face of an elder who knows, hearing the laughter of strangers sitting next to me, sometimes that loud silence. The green in the leaves as they burst forth in spring, the birds as they sing, the rain as it falls gently, the thunder as it startles me from my sleep. Here we are among friends. Here, when the connections seem lost, unseen, let us find friends. If we must be lonely, let us not be alone. If we have been unwelcomed, let us be welcomed here. Let us gather by the doors that open heart to heart, mind to mind, soul to soul. Let us watch the weather, care for the earth and our neighbors, keep an eye on the children, and keep our hearts open for those of us who truly need those friends today. And as we call to and hear one another, let the calls bring us to become our greatest selves. For all that we are and all we are becoming, we give thanks, and so be it. Blessed be. Amen. I always like to sing this particular hymn together on a day when we kick off an annual campaign. It's number 6 if you like to use the book, or here the words should be on your screen at home as well as here in the meeting room. Just as long as I have breath. I invite you to stand in body or in spirit. Our offering is split today 50-50 with green amendments for the generations. Green amendment for the generations works for pure water, clean air, a healthy environment. You can donate using the text to give number in the order of service, followed with the keyword MUUF and the dollar amount. You can also give online. The address for the online page is in the order of service. We take our offering. Forgive me if I've told this story before, but when my daughter was very small, she said, "Dad, I love the music at church. It's so much better than the music on the radio or on the Apple iPod. Something about it being live, the spirit in it." Thank you. Dan Cater's our guest pianist this morning. Thank you. On Tuesday, the right-wing Fox propaganda network avoided a very embarrassing court trial. Fox agreed instead to pay Dominion Voting Systems almost $800 million to compensate Dominion for years of harm to Dominion's reputation, because Fox had willfully and maliciously lied. Oh, okay, neither the trial nor the settlement said that, but I think they wouldn't have settled if it weren't obvious at this point. Now, I confess I don't watch Fox News. Nah, I don't think I can call them that. Fox propaganda. Even before the trial, I just didn't want the voices of these guys in my head. And now I kind of understand why, because the trial has proven how much Fox hates their own viewers, or at least disrespects them. It's amazing to me, so many people even tune in, knowing that Fox despises them, thinks so little of them. I don't know, I don't understand it. I confess that I laughed, a little bit of schadenfreude, maybe even, that the New York Times did an analysis of Fox propaganda's coverage of the $787 million settlement. Fox, on that Tuesday, only mentioned it 3 times for a total of 6 minutes. It got a lot more coverage everywhere else. Well, maybe not in InfoWars or one of those crazy places, but I laughed, but it's kind of, I think of it as, the humor is kind of icky funny. Ugh. I laugh, but I'm icky at the same time. Ew. It's sort of the same laugh I used to have when, back in the day, Fox would brand itself as fair and balanced. I never was sure how they got to that either. I've been thinking a lot about balance lately. We're only 6 months out of at least the worst of a global pandemic, maybe not even that, 3 months. Or maybe it's just gone on vacation, I'm not sure. And then Earth Day yesterday, and I'm thinking about climate change. Fires and hurricanes and floods in California. Seems like they're happening all at the same time. And what is this thing where people all over the world, like Hungary and Turkey and Russia and the United States, they want to elect people who clearly disrespect them, even hate them. And then we turn to the cruelties of racism as if it were somehow normal. What is it with human beings? I just have been wondering. How is life so out of balance? Most Americans grew up learning Americans should fight against injustice. I remember that in public school. I remember the stories about the American Revolution, and freedom, and the equality of the vote, all of that. And yet, even now, some Americans think all of that's only for white people. A lot of powerful people insist, here we are the day after Earth Day, and very wealthy, very powerful people saying, this caring for the earth you want to do, it's too costly. We can't afford to do it. Although even if, as somebody who majored in economics in college, it doesn't take a lot of skill to price out the cost of all the floods, of all the rain, of all the hurricanes, of the droughts. Excuse me, but I think the actual costliness is going to be far more costly not to do something than it's going to be to do something about global warming, about climate change, about the amount of carbon we spew into the atmosphere. For me, the most obvious imbalance was during the pandemic. Scientists told us, wear your masks, take care of each other. You'll prevent the spread of this SARS-CoV-2 virus. If you don't, there are people who will die. And yet some of our neighbors refused to wear the mask. They said, we are free, we should be free not to wear a mask if we don't want to. Even though wearing a mask would save someone else's life. For me, that's just so out of balance. And the balance is what I find here among you in this spiritual tradition. We call it a living tradition because it's not something someone wrote down and said, here we are, we're done, you don't have to think about it anymore, just do it. That's not what this is about. Everything is connected. What happens to any of you happens to me. And what's happening to me ultimately has an impact on you as well. Or what I choose to do has an impact on you, has an impact on our children. Those children in that library or who were sitting with us in an hour in classrooms, they're all ours in a way, our spiritual children at the very least. And the balance is the way our lives affect one another. It's inescapable. It's a scientific truth and a spiritual truth. And yet, in this larger world, there's illogical ideas that the cost of doing something about the amount of carbon we put into the atmosphere is too expensive to deal with. As if what we do now doesn't affect lives later or people on the other side of the earth. This illogical assumption that we're not interconnected makes no sense to me. You know, I came to understand balance as I came to understand more and more about what it meant to be a Unitarian Universalist. And it's important to note that in my own journey, when I was growing up, we didn't actually believe that everything was interconnected. That was not something I heard about when I was a kid. We talked about the importance of tending for the environment, for the world around us, for the other forms of life in addition to human lives. But I was also taught that science was the only logical basis for any life, including a spiritual life. I learned that if it couldn't be proven by science, then it wasn't real. But I experienced something so different from that congregation I grew up in. I love science. Science is a great gift. I mean, some of my classes in religious education, I'd be up in classrooms, just as our children are up in classrooms now. I would learn about the scientific method. In part, I was going to learn about the scientific method at church because I was not going to learn about it in public school. They were still all worried about Darwinism and evolution and all that kind of thing where I grew up. But I learned something else from those people who are dear to me. I learned and knew that they loved me and that they respected me. I could go to the congregation. I could go to the First UU Church of Columbus. I could ask any question. All questions were welcome. They nurtured this questioning soul that I have. I was born with it. They encouraged me to ask those questions. And then as I asked questions, they saved my life in 100 small ways and some pretty big ways also. By the time I became an adult, I realized we don't love one another because it's a logical thing to do, even though it is a logical thing to do. We shape our spiritual lives around love because it's what makes our living joyful. It's what gives our life meaning. My congregation loved me into life, a very real love. So coming out of that experience of Unitarian Universalism, I would say I believe in science, and I would say I believe in love. And I found those values here living among you as well as many others, but these fundamental values that we share. And I admire the way you live them You're generous with one another, with your time, with your money, with your vulnerability and your spirits. It's why I wanted to come here and be with you as an interim minister. It's why I contribute financially in support of this congregation. So in this journey, I was experiencing finding balance. I was struggling with balance. I was a Unitarian Universalist. I was an American. I was this guy who had been a kid and still in some ways was that kid who kept asking questions and learned how important love was. And I decided eventually in college I would major in economics. I wanted to know, why do people have to starve in this world? There's enough food on this earth to feed everybody, yet people go hungry. So I took economics. I thought, it's just a matter of, let's apply some logic and reason and get the food out to these people. So I took economics. I was taught that the world is one of intense competition. I learned that we must have free markets so that individual people with the best ideas could make the best choices and be rewarded with the highest incomes. I learned in economics what a poet once wrote centuries before. The world is red in tooth and claw. Economics was the study of a social evolution that rewarded the survival of the fittest, of the smartest. In economics classes, they called this the free market. And that free market, I learned, was driven by the success of those individuals who made the best choices, the most rational choices. That was a favorite phrase. Rational actors in the marketplace. And they deserved the money they got because of the overall good they brought to the system. But I was struggling second, third year. I was like, wait a minute. The system assumes that poor people deserve what they've got? That doesn't make sense. And if anybody had mentioned to me at the time that in this free market systems that corporations have the equivalent meaning and purpose that people have, i.e. corporations are people, I would have said, oh, no, I'm done. I would have been done with that. I really wasn't sure what to do after college. I'd majored in economics and I was pretty disappointed. I'd found the world was complex. Economics did not have the answers about how to feed everybody, nor did political science. Maybe art, maybe music could do it. I went to work in my family's business, and I discovered some very important things in that business. One of the things that I discovered, actually while I was working in the business, but I learned to see it while working in the business, but I learned it at the UU Church in Columbus. I learned it in my congregation, the ancient linguistic root of the word freedom. Because I do believe in free markets. But what is freedom? Freedom has the same ancient linguistic root as the word friend. Freedom, friend, come from the same Indo-European root word that meant beloved or dear. The truth of freedom is that the more we love each other, at least in the ancient meaning of the word, the more we love each other, the more freedom we get as individuals, the more tightly bound we are in friendship, the more freedom we have given each other in our own lives, in each other's lives. So in my family's jewelry business, my father was very generous, sometimes really patient with me. Young, kind of a little brash sometimes. And I worked in this free market in a neighborhood where my father had grown up, where my grandfather had grown up. It was not the free market that I'd learned about in college, though. My family's business was not theoretical in its free market operations. It was real. It was actual people I saw, sometimes year to year, sometimes maybe a couple times in a generation. These were people that had come and bought perhaps wedding rings from my grandfather, and their grandchildren were now buying wedding rings from me. And the thing about this free market, these were people who were liberal and conservative. These were people who were progressive and socialist or libertarian. They were young and they were old. They were rich or they were not at all rich. Many of these people connected through the business, the free market that had been people coming to buy jewelry from my family, but maybe connected in so many other ways. It was a market built of generations of people across neighborhoods in a town. A market connected in trust and respect. The market in this case was a neighborhood. And the rules of this market were to be trustworthy and to care for one another, to respect one another. And the freedom we had was the freedom we received from one another. And that's what I had found in my Unitarian Universalist church, and that's what I find here in this fellowship. A community practicing everyday justice, mutual love. And like that free market in which my family had done business, there's generations of trust. So many different kinds of identities. A welcoming of each other as we are, and an expectation that we will care for each other, and that we will build a community based on love. I believe in freedom, but what I've discovered in the congregation I grew up in and what I've discovered in my ministry in the decades since, the only real freedom we get is the freedom we receive from one another. And here's what that looks like in science. Science used to have a theory that one tree was just that, one tree. A tree grew from, an oak tree grew from an acorn, and it was just the workings of DNA sucking up nourishment from the soil and energy through its leaves. Every single tree struggled against all other trees and all other forms of life just to survive. The world, science said, was red in tooth and claw and branch and root. And good science, being all about doubt, proved the theory wrong. Trees, in fact, live in communities. Trees communicate with one another. Trees have learned to weave their roots together, and not just through the connections of roots, but through the fungi and other organisms that live in soil. And they literally speak to one another. They learn from one another. They weave themselves into the earth. And not only interconnected with each other through the soil, through their roots, but woven together with all kinds of life forms, birds that nest in their branches, the creatures that live in their bark. It's all literally one interconnected life. The truth of science is the same truth that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. preached. It was many years ago now, almost 60 years. He preached, he wrote, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. We are tied to a single garment of destiny." And so injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I think the first time that I understood this way of inviting each other into connection. It happened about 22 years ago. It's when I first marched in the Pride Parade in Buffalo, New York. I'd just arrived a couple of years before, had gotten settled in. I was the new minister of the Unitarian Universalist church in an urban neighborhood. They had just voted, just a handful of years before, to become what we call a welcoming congregation. Welcoming in the sense of meeting each other where we are. Welcoming in the sense of giving one another the freedom to truly become ourselves. And being open to the challenges and the surprises that come with living in that kind of a welcoming spirit. The parade was announced, it was being organized. I signed up the congregation and invited a group of members to come along. Let's march in the Pride Parade. And when the day came, I literally had to dust off and wash my clerical collar. I actually have one. I don't think you've seen me in it. That congregation had not seen me or any of their ministers in a clerical collar for probably 70 or 80 years. The day came and I had the clerical collar up in my office. And as soon as the service was done, the group was getting ready to go down and go to the parade assembly ground. And I put my collar on and I came back down to the coffee hour. The moment was really quite amazing because I walked into my collar and the whole room went silent. Everybody turned and looked at me and went, whoa. Unitarian Universalist ministers don't normally wear clerical collars, but there are times it can be very important to wear them. That was a day I knew would be important. No clergy person had ever marched in the Pride Parade in Buffalo, New York before that day. The parade marshal knew I was going to be there. She'd actually called me up and said, I see you're signed up. Are you coming? And I said, yes, I'll be there. I'm actually going to be wearing my clerical collar. And she was like, oh, really? Oh, that's great. And I got there with our folks who were assembling in our assembly spot in the parade gathering area. And she came up to me with a microphone and said, would you say a blessing for us all? Very few of these people in this Pride Parade had ever heard of a religion that loved them for who they are. The parade marshal announced that the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church would offer a blessing. And that parade assembly ground, it was the parking lot of the Symphony Hall, got very quiet, just like the social hall in the church had gotten very quiet. Everybody was staring at me like, what are you going to say to us? They were staring at me, dykes on bikes, beautiful drag queens from Club Marcella, the parents and friends of queer people. And I spoke from my heart as a Unitarian Universalist, specifically this moment a Universalist. And I decided to use pretty traditional language. I really wanted to. This is what I wanted to say, and I wanted them to feel it in the depths of their hearts. I said, God loves everyone in this parade. God loves each of us for who we are: gay, lesbian, transgendered, queer, and straight. And I finished my blessing describing the parade as a celebration of life. And then I saw a tough woman on a Harley motorcycle wipe her eyes, trying not to have anybody see she was doing it. I overheard one of the beautiful drag queens announce that her mascara was running and it was a mess. We started parading down Main Street. And then we passed a group of fundamentalist Christian protesters. They had showed up every year to hurl Bible verses and curses at all us queer folks. But then they saw my collar. No clergy person ever marched in the parade before. I loved their first reaction. They didn't know what to say. They just stared at me like, what? And then I overheard one of them say, it's just a costume. And another one, this is the part that surprised me the most, said, no, that's the Unitarian minister. Wow, they've been doing their homework. But I have to admit, my favorite part then of that particular moment was the lead minister whose arm, it's like in a movie almost, arm is going up very slowly with his pointy finger at me. This look on his face of fury, and he screamed at me, son of Baal! Son of Baal! Baal? Now, I went to theological school. I know who Baal was, an obscure god in the Old Testament of the Bible. Nobody's worshipped Baal in probably 2,000 years, but okay. One of the gods of the Canaanite pantheon. I confess that I really enjoyed making the Bible thumpers so agitated. I answered their son of Baal accusations by mixing traditional universalism and the love of the holy with some queer theology. Jesus loves you, I said to them, and Jesus loves these gay and lesbian and queer folks too. And for a second time, in just a minute, I silenced them for a moment. The parade went on, we went on. The spectators along the side of the street, there were more and more of them as we got closer to the end of the parade. People stared at me and my collar. And my daughter, we actually were passing the church, it's the UU church itself, and my daughter had been standing with the spectators, and she saw me, and she ran out into the street, and I picked her up and carried her in my arms. She was, can I be at the parade, Daddy? Of course, I said. And the spectators on the street saw me carrying my daughter, wearing my collar. And they too would stare for a minute or two and then began to cheer. All of that story because what happened the next year was what was so important. Because the next year, there were a dozen congregations signed up to march in the Pride Parade. Fine Episcopalian ladies in pearls, but sensible shoes. Presbyterian parents, Jewish grandparents, priests, ministers, rabbis. And the spectators were different the next year too. Somehow, the parade, it was different. There were all these religious people marching in this parade, celebrating life, celebrating queer people. And suddenly, the spectators weren't spectators anymore. They were participants in a holiday. Life was in balance in those moments for me. Even in the moments when somebody pointed a finger at me and called me a devil or a son of Baal or whatever he meant to call me. But balanced. Balanced because I was grounded on love. Balanced because I was weaving as many connections as possible, far beyond any personal ability to weave anything, just being present and encouraging the interconnectedness of our lives in love and giving one another freedom. This moment of balance, this experience of life in its fullness of love, And I've experienced it again and again, and even as I look out at the trees and the leaves folding out from buds, I can remember that fullness, that connection, the love. This is what we hear in this very moment. Aspire to create, to be interconnected in the roots and branches of our aspirations. None of us lives alone, even if we feel lonely. We cannot help but depend on one another for the unmeasurable, unlimited possibilities of work and play. Our individuality is a good and beautiful thing. And our individuality is made possible by the freedom we receive from each other. Even in this very moment, the lights, the water we'll be drinking, the food we'll be eating, we're supported by people we'll never meet, kept safe and nourished and warm in a web of life that goes far beyond our ability to sense it. And this is why we're here, that we weave as a community this kind of love among each other and practice it so that we can take it out to the world. It is for this that we write checks or have automatic withdrawals from our bank accounts so that we feed and love and grow, that we create a world that's truly free and loving. And this is a balance that evolves out of commitment and love and cooperation. It's good science. It's the truth of love. And it's wonderful to be here and see you living it. I'd like to sing when we close. Before we close. This is a Blue Boat Home. I hope I haven't used it too much, but it seemed perfect for today. I invite you to stand in body or spirit.
Stand
In a world that seems broken and disconnected and so out of balance, may you find the balance in love and connection. And when it seems lost and difficult, to remember, know we will be here working together to create it again and again. Go in peace, be in peace.